December 1607, the Virginia colony, on the edge of the known world. A trespasser is brought to meet a leader of an alien land. English explorer John Smith has a rare audience with Chief Powhatan. Smith writes,
"He kindly welcomed me with good words and great platters of sundry victuals."
After the royal treatment, Smith is hopeful he's safe at last. He's in for a surprise.
What now? What is this?
At this pivotal moment, one of the most famous rescues in history unfolds.
As many as could thereon laid on his head, and being ready with their clubs to beat out his brains. Pocahontas, the king's dearest daughter, got his head in her arms and laid her own upon his to save him.
The legend of Pocahontas is based on Smith's own account, but the experts don't buy it.
The method of doing away with Smith was to have his brains beaten out on an altar stone. That was not the kind of death that Powhatan Indian people meted out to non-Powhatans. If they were really going to do him in, they would have tortured him to death, and it would have been a lot tougher for anybody to rescue him.
And Pocahontas? The real Pocahontas? She was just 11 years old at the time. The experts don't credit her for John Smith's escape. It's America on day one, the first few dangerous years that put a new nation on the map. It's a story of greed, murder, and betrayal. A moment in time that reveals the settlers of a new world at their best and their worst. Jamestown, Virginia, one of the most important archaeological sites ever discovered. It's the first permanent English settlement in America, the launching pad for the American dream. This place that changed world history forever covers over 22 acres. Owned and managed by the Association for the Preservation of Virginia Antiquities, the dig site is packed with cutting-edge equipment and a full team of 13. Among them, Blythe Straub, the project curator. Her job, identify and organize the staggering array of artifacts recovered at the site.
I'm most surprised about the sheer quantity of artifacts that have survived. We have over 500,000 artifacts from this early time period.
All this might never have happened. It took one man's gut instinct to rechart the map of the past, starting at the James River.
Believe it or not, right here was the landing place of May 14, 1607, where, according to the descriptions, the sailors could tie their boats up to the trees because the channel was so close. 400 years of erosion has worked on this western end of the island to the point you couldn't recognize the landing spot, but I really believe this is where it is.
The conventional wisdom was that, like the landing place, the fort had also eroded into the river and was lost forever.
However, it was clear to me there was a piece of ground that had never really been looked at.
For 30 years, archaeologist Bill Kelso nursed his obsession. Kelso had a hunch that the fort had been built on a hill, safely above the river. In 1994, the dig started with one dreamer's shovel full of dirt. He broke ground at a historic site where no one had dug before.
And I remember one lady who came up, she said, "Well, what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm looking for James Fort." And she had her little son with her, and she sort of backed away. And she said, "Now, come on, Bobby, let's not upset the nice man." So I think she thought I was absolutely out of my mind.
It didn't take long before Kelso's hunch paid off.
About immediately, just under the grass, I began to find artifacts that I knew were old enough to be the James Fort period.
What your parents told you was wrong. America didn't start at Plymouth Rock. It's May 13, 1607, 13 years before the Pilgrims landed. and English explorers are already trying to carve out a piece of America. In the early 1600s, England is in a race with Spain to gobble up the New World. Spain is cleaning up in South America, rich with gold and silver. The English figure they'll hit pay dirt in Virginia. They plan to come back to England rich with gold, but most will never leave here alive.
We came to our seating place some 8 miles from the point of land where our ships do lie so near the shore.
Settler George Percy recalls his first impressions.
The ground all flowing over with fair flowers, as though it had been in any garden or orchard in England, strawberries and other fruits unknown, woods full of cedar and cypress trees. We kept on our way in this paradise.
They got here in May, a few days before the weather really changes, and the insects have not quite matured enough to, nail you. So this probably looked like paradise.
The English call their settlement Jamestown, after their king. But they are bankrolled by the Virginia Company, a private enterprise looking to make a quick killing in the New World.
Here they were coming to this quiet, dark place where there were people you didn't know lurking behind bushes, ready to pounce upon you if you ventured out of the fort. It must have been like going to the moon.
Even so, the English settlers bring with them the status symbols of life back home. A simple piece of iron tube shows the lengths to which these gentlemen will go to dress the part.
It would be stuck in the fire and heated up, and then used with great quantities of starch to starch the goffs or bends in the big cartwheel ruffs that the gentlemen wore.
While the gentlemen try to carry out the company's business plan,
Do go soft.
some cling to the traditions of upper-class England.
This heat needs must come to an end.
So who's up for bowling?
Most definitely. So,
There's not a single woman here to impress. But the evidence suggests that even in this wilderness, they fret about their grooming.
They were really particular about their teeth and about their ears, and this little scoop would actually dig out earwax. One end has a hook, and that would be for scraping what they call scale off your teeth. We call it plaque.
George Percy, a true blue blood, is the son of an earl. But because he's not the eldest son, he's denied an inheritance. Jamestown is his only chance to make it big. While he looks for trading deals, other settlers are expected to do the heavy lifting. Among them, 27-year-old John Smith. Luckily for the settlement, he's not afraid to get his hands dirty. Short in height, but big on bravado, he's a former mercenary and one-time pirate. Smith's accounts of life at Jamestown paint a dark picture.
Within 10 days, scarce 10 among us could either go or well stand. Such extreme weakness and sickness oppressed us. Our drink was water, our lodging castles in the air.
Smith labeled the smooth-talking noblemen ingenious verbalists, slackers incapable of hacking it in the new land.
Our ingenious verbalists were no less plague to us in Virginia than the locusts to the Egyptians.
John Smith may be a shameless self-promoter, but he's also the best leader they've got.
Smith never expected other people to work harder than he did himself. And he got in there and, led the charge and didn't just sit there and take notes. He's a hero to me because he was fighting the system, and I think of him again as a sort of John Wayne of the 17th century. On
May 21st, 1607, Smith and the leaders of the settlement set out to explore the James River. May 26th. While they're still upriver, the settlement is leaderless. The Indians seize the moment to strike.
But on a great adventure he was bound, the greatest Loyana to who gave.
There came above 200 of them with their king and gave a very furious assault and shot through the tents.
It is part of a swept-hilted rapier, a sword. This is actually the hilt. These types of weapons would be worn by gentlemen.
A weapon. The wrong weapon for this fight. Evidence the settlers are so confident they have not yet unpacked most of their firearms. The settlers learn the hard way that the New World plays by brutal new rules. Evidence found by Kelso's team reveals the Indian tribes may have formed an alliance against their common enemy.
We found hundreds of stone tips of arrows of different types of stone. It seems to have come from all over the place. It may be that various Indians from different regions were assigned to come and harass the fort to keep the English under control. Indians were used to guerrilla warfare. And here comes the European over here that we're used to, let's all line up and march into each other and play by the rules.
After they had spent their arrows and felt the sharpness of our shot, retired into the woods. They hurt us 11 men, whereof one died after.
Why was only one colonist killed? Anthropologist Helen Roundtree thinks the Indians just wanted to get the settlers' attention.
They wanted to teach the English that they had better go carefully. They had better not explore and demand information. They had better watch their step.
After the attack, the settlers switched priorities. Defense first, trade second.
We built our fort, which was triangle-wise, having 3 bulwarks at every corner. We made ourselves sufficiently strong for those savages.
May 27, 1607. Rising out of Jamestown's sandy soil, the first structure of the first permanent English settlement in America.
All right, well.
Today, Kelso's team sifts every shovelful in search of what really happened here and tracks each find by computer.
We can go back and essentially recreate all the data that we've extracted from the ground. So if we want to know where a specific artifact came in, then we can quickly find out within a few clicks where it exactly came from.
Kind of a pattern.
So you can start looking at patterning of deposition of artifacts.
What surprises them the most is what they don't find. Almost no evidence of farming tools. Proof the settlers were completely reliant on what they could trade with the Indians.
I went up to the town and showed them what copper and hatchets they should have for corn, each family seeking to give me most content.
Copper was something that could be polished up and made shiny. Shiny things were highly valued. There were not very many shiny things in the Indian world.
Farewell.
But Smith soon encounters some tough customers among the tribes.
I traded with a churlish and treacherous nation. They attempted to take our pieces and our swords by stealth. They were ready to assault us.
There's treachery amongst them. Step slow.
From his contacts with different tribes, Smith learns of a powerful Indian leader named Powhatan. This is the man who can make or break the settlers' business dealings with the Indians. But Powhatan is a shadowy figure, as elusive as he is influential. John Smith hopes to find Powhatan and to map the Chickahominy River.
Climax ready. They'll spy Indians, set fire to the corn.
On December 10th, 1607, he sets out upriver, deep into enemy territory. As soon as he leaves, 2 of his men are ambushed. Smith has no one left to watch his back. Led by an Indian guide, John Smith probes deep into the Virginia wilderness. He keeps his eye out for the Powhatan Indians. Too bad for Smith, they find him first.
Within a quarter of an hour, I heard a loud cry and a hollowing. The Indians had betrayed us.
Smith suspects his guide has led him into a trap, but Smith uses him as a human shield.
I seized him and bound his arm fast to my hand in a garter, with my pistol ready bent to be revenged on him. Men environed me, each drawing their bow. Thus surprised, I resolved to try their mercies.
But John Smith has got another secret weapon the Indians aren't expecting. Smith is as slick a showman as he is a talker, and it's showtime.
Much they marveled at the playing of the fly and needle, which they could see so plainly and yet not touch. They all stood as amazed with admiration and laid down their bows and arrows.
And we have found a compass case. The actual glass part would fit into this center circle right in here. John Smith began to amaze them with the compass and how it worked. And as they looked through the glass was very foreign to them anyway. And you could see through it, and you could see the pointer going around.
Could this 400-year-old artifact be the actual compass that saved John Smith's life?
The hour lines on the compass are calibrated for a latitude of Venice, so it wouldn't work too well for Jamestown. And we do know also that John Smith traveled extensively through Italy, so it's possible that it may be his compass dial.
John Smith's gamble pays off. He earns an audience with Powhatan himself. He also meets Powhatan's favorite daughter, Pocahontas. What Smith claims happens next could be the first great whopper in American history.
The story that Smith writes about Pocahontas saving his life at the last minute from getting his brains beaten out on a rock, he made that one up.
As for Pocahontas' legendary drop-dead beauty, don't go there.
Pocahontas was not tall and skinny. She was more likely to be rather short and heavily muscled, since given the work Powhatan Indian women and girls did, it would have been very, very physical. It's much more likely that Pocahontas was built like a piano mover. What is more likely, sort of an alliance was struck between Powhatan personally and John Smith personally.
Jamestown.
Smith and Powhatan make a sweetheart deal for a trading partnership. The Indians will supply the settlers with corn in return for copper, tools, and beads.
These are the sky blue beads of John Smith, who, such a marketing man he was, told the Indians that the Queen of England wore these beads. And so, of course, the chief suddenly wanted to have him for his very own, and Smith just happened to have a couple barrels along with him.
In spite of Smith's salesmanship, or maybe because of it, the two men managed to hit it off. Smith ends up staying there for 2 weeks.
You have to look at Captain John Smith as the man. He had a good relationship with the Virginia Indians. He was Powhatan's adopted son. And I think he admired their way of life. He wrote down their languages and studied them and tried to learn from their adaptation to the environment, just like the English would have to do to survive.
The Indian customs he witnessed must have seemed strange to an Englishman of the time. For instance, Smith and his fellow settlers never bathed, but the Indians bathe every day. John Smith must have been shocked.
That captivity was significant to both the Indians and the English, because it was during that time that John Smith was able to see a good deal of ordinary Indian life while nobody was shooting at him. All his other visits to Indian towns were either diplomatic occasions or military ones. So the historians and anthropologists are fascinated with his captivity.
Smith arrives back at camp to report on his alliance with the Indians. But he sees his good news may have come too late. Over half of the original settlers have died of sickness and starvation.
John Smith!
There's more bad news for Smith. His enemies have learned of the deaths of his men and hold him responsible.
How feared Robinson and Emery?
They plotted to have him put to death for the lives of Robinson and Emery, pretending that the fault was his that led them to their ends.
Within hours, Smith is tried, convicted, and sentenced to death. Suddenly, Smith gets another amazing break. Just as they're about to string him up, a new boatful of settlers arrives. The new arrivals shift the balance of power in Smith's favor. In a surprise twist, they have all charges against Smith dropped and elect him president of the colony. Within 3 months, Smith's leadership pays off. The colony is thriving. A pretty odd assortment that includes 6 more tailors, a perfumer, a glassmaker, and 2 gold diviners, along with 2 English women, the colony's first. Historians always imagined this as a world completely walled off from the Indians that surrounded them.
Indians on one side of the palisade and the settlers on the other side, and everything's just clear cut, you know, that culture against culture and all. But I don't think that happened at all.
By examining the artifacts at the site, Kelso believes he can confirm a controversial theory, that Indians actually lived side by side with settlers inside Jamestown's walls.
Possible little lead shot, trade beads, things like that.
To search for evidence which might support this theory, Kelso's colleague, Eric Dietz, sifts through debris with an archaeological device called a flotation tank.
All the organic material, once it's agitated, will float to the top, and it separates it out from the things that sink. We'll float all of that soil through this tank and make sure that we get every little bit of evidence that we can. Here's a little fish jaw. It's the jawbone to a fish. Right here, it's a very small piece, but it's a piece of the local Indian pottery.
One of hundreds found so far. Too many to come from trade with the Indians alone.
Sure, it goes to this pot.
And traces of corn and venison indicate many were used in cooking.
Remember the other one? That is a typical type of meal that the Indians were consuming at this time, and would have been something they would have prepared for the colonists to eat.
The archaeologists believe it helps support the theory that settlers and Indians lived and ate together. And one contemporary account suggests that maybe they went further than that.
There's one very tantalizing reference of 40 or 50 of the settlers had married with the Virginia Indians.
The Indian culture here actually used women as a way to forge alliances, and Powhatan often offered women to the colonists.
For the Indians, as for European royalty, marriage serves as a tool of diplomacy. Despite tension with the Indians, the bitterest conflict at Jamestown is among the settlers themselves. According to Smith, the wealthy gentlemen don't appreciate that he makes them knuckle down.
He that will not work shall not eat. For the labors of 30 or 40 honest and industrious men shall not be consumed to maintain 150 loiterers.
At Jamestown, grim evidence suggests that friction between the settlers flared into violence. The remains of an apparent murder victim have been analyzed by forensic experts at the site.
He died a violent, traumatic death. There was a lead ball found immediately associated with his remains, which passed through his leg just below the knee. He would have bled out rather quickly. There's a major artery running down the leg that would have probably been severed by the injuries sustained. He was a male, 17 to 20 years of age, and of European ancestry. These things we know based on analysis of the skeletal elements.
An Englishman killed by an English bullet, the corpse known only as JR 102C. The first known murder victim in American history. Forensics can reconstruct the face, but the victim's name and the killer's motive remain a mystery.
The fact that we found this individual was killed with a European weapon is clear indication that there was some kind of unrest going on.
Unrest, made worse by deteriorating health conditions. Because for the first year and a half, the settlers rely on the dirty river for drinking water. Scores die of disease.
There are no natural springs on the island. And that's important in a way because I think that's why the Paspahegh Indians, which were the local tribe, said, yeah, you can have Jamestown Island. I mean, they probably, chuckle, because it's worthless. It doesn't have any water.
In January 1609, Smith claims to have ordered the digging of Jamestown's first well to provide the crucial supply of fresh water they need to stay alive.
We so quietly followed our business that in 3 months we made a well in the fort of excellent sweet water, which till then was wanting.
Good water. And clean.
For 4 centuries, the well was lost. Archaeologists had no hard proof this key to Jamestown's survival had ever existed until September 2002, when Bill Kelso and his team uncovered an intriguing circle of ancient bricks.
We really want to find artifacts that'll help us date this well. Might be some kind of axe. That's what I'm thinking right now. And so far, the artifacts that are coming out of it are early 17th century. Everything that's coming out of it is showing that it's old.
The well turns out to be much more. A tunnel back in time. The unique properties of its damp soil have miraculously preserved materials that would otherwise have decayed centuries ago. The leather of a settler's shoe, the pewter of a measuring jug, and the firing mechanism of a musket. Each discovery makes the team more convinced that this could be the well that John Smith built, a hole in the ground that helped the English sink their roots into a brave new world. John Smith has solved Jamestown's water problems. You'd think his leadership role would be secure. You'd be wrong. Smith's gentlemen enemies are more determined than ever to put this commoner in his place.
The leaders who were being shown up by his abilities want to get rid of him somehow.
John Smith is upriver, deep in Indian territory. While he's asleep, he meets with an unfortunate accident. The gunpowder that Smith keeps with him explodes. Amazingly, though seriously wounded and without medical care, he survives. And he suspects foul play.
Someone fired his powder bag, which tore the flesh from his body and thighs, 9 or 10 inches square in a most pitiful manner.
Some experts think this accident calls for a closer look.
A powder flask blew up, either accidentally or on purpose. He seems to be pretty astute with the weapons, though why it would suddenly blow up on him.
Could this be the New World's first attempted political assassination? If it's meant to get rid of John Smith, it does the job. Smith is so badly wounded, he has to step down. His replacement, George Percy, can't help gloating.
Smith, being an ambitious, unworthy, and vainglorious fellow, was justly deprived of all. The place of government being void, I accepted thereof.
After 2 turbulent years in America, Smith heads home to nurse his wounds. He will return to America 5 years later to promote his latest scheme, a colony he calls New England. Smith's departure and a harsh winter send a chill through the settlers left to survive at the fort. Relations with the Indians grow icy as well. The English build settlements in defiance of Powhatan's wishes. The chief orders his warriors to kill anyone who sets foot outside of Jamestown's walls.
There must be something here.
Trading with the Indians for supplies is over, and leaving the fort is suicidal. Trapped and running out of food, 500 settlers see no way out.
Now all of us at Jamestown, beginning to feel that sharp prick of hunger, which no man truly describe, but he which has tasted the bitterness thereof, a world of miseries ensued.
When Kelso's team probes a deep pit dating back to that winter, they find grim evidence why the settlers called it the starving time.
This bone's been chopped up. You can see it actually has some cut marks on it. The way it's been splintered is evidence of, the butchering of some sort of animal.
Evidence the settlers are reduced to eating their dogs and horses. The cats are next to go, leaving the rats.
We found things like a black rat, which is the carrier of the Black Plague, and these were being eaten. There's poisonous snakes. We got the bones of snake vertebrae. There's a special barb on the vertebrae of a poisonous snake. That wouldn't be normal cuisine on the menu unless you're real desperate.
The threat of imminent starvation now pushes some over the edge. According to this account by George Percy,
nothing was spared to maintain life and do these things which seem incredible, as to dig up dead corpses out of graves and eat them.
One deranged settler named Collins is tried by Percy for killing, assaulting, and eating his wife. For this culinary crime, he is tortured and put to death. And one account says all he left was his wife's head, but you may find that a little hard to swallow. Because the Indians are also ravaged by starvation, their siege of Jamestown peters out. But that brings the settlers no relief. They have fallen victim to an even more relentless enemy. To identify it, Bill Kelso's colleague, Dennis Blanton, looks beyond old documents to consult an actual witness, a survivor of that terrible winter.
This tree is at least 600 years old, actually a little more. So it includes the years 1606 to 1612. And if you examine the tree, you can see the rings very clearly in the section. You see the rings become thinner, dramatically thinner, which indicates well below average precipitation.
How bad is it in 1609? The tree ring data reveals that the region is suffering its worst drought in 700 years.
This Indian leader came to the settlement on the island and spoke to the English. And he begged them to pray to your gods for rain, because we've prayed to our gods and we're not getting results. Surely your God is more powerful. We
see your boats and weapons. That tells us that you might have more influence than we do.
Archaeologists find the graves of those who died in the starving time underscore the written accounts of all-out panic.
There are several burials that appear to be rather hasty in nature. They're not very deep. The graves aren't necessarily long enough for the occupant. One grave shack contained 3 people. These sorts of things suggest that there were a lot of people dying at times when it was difficult to carry out a proper burial.
Now the only hope for the desperate settlement lies in outside help. Unaware of the dire plight at Jamestown, a fleet of ships is already on its way from England with more settlers and supplies. William Strachey, an aspiring playwright on one of the ships, keeps an eyewitness account of a crossing gone wrong.
Winds and seas were as mad as fury and rage could make them. For 24 hours, the storm in a restless tumult had blown so exceedingly as we could not apprehend in our imaginations any possibility of greater violence.
7 of the 9 ships make it to Jamestown, but most of their food and supplies are lost or ruined in the storm. They arrive with 400 more settlers, 400 more mouths to feed. Now they're in even worse shape than they were before. 2 of the 9 ships never make it. One of them, the flagship, with Strachey aboard. Now, like Strachey, the settlers at Jamestown are marooned, their dreams in tatters. But after almost 3 years fighting against all odds, for Jamestown, fate is about to take another unexpected twist. The last gasp of Jamestown settlement. An artifact has been found which reveals the surprising identity of someone trapped in that moment. A ring with a family crest. But whose ring is it?
We know that this is the crest of William Strachey, or the Strachey family.
It's the rarest of all archaeological finds, a direct connection that links a specific person to a specific moment in time. For the first time, hard evidence may confirm written accounts that William Strachey made it from Bermuda, where he had been shipwrecked, all the way up to Jamestown.
Strachey had spent 9 months in literal paradise in Bermuda. This was a great place. There's food all over the place.
The colonists spent a year there building 2 new ships, by which they finally did get to Virginia.
Establishing Strachey at Jamestown is crucial because it validates his eyewitness accounts. The settlement has become a death camp.
The palisadoes torn down, the gates off the hinges, and empty houses which the owner's death had taken from them.
Desperate settlers have torn the walls of the fort apart to use as firewood. Jamestown has consumed itself.
The Indian killed as fast without as famine and pestilence did within, with many more sufferances brought upon them by their own disorders than I have heart to express.
9 out of 10 of the original settlers have died. Since the start of winter, only 60 survive. For the new leaders, it's a no-brainer.
There could be no readier course than to abandon the country.
Sir Thomas Gates, the new governor of the settlement, has seen enough. He makes the painful decision to pull the plug.
The decision to leave Jamestown was probably the last ditch, just, the last thing it could possibly do, but the only option.
In a pit located where the gates of the fort used to be, Bill Kelso's team finds evidence of the drastic steps the settlers took to keep their weapons out of Indian hands.
In this area, when we first started excavating, we came across the top of a helmet, cabasset helmet of the time period. And then as we uncovered it, found that it had been placed upright on a shelf in the pit.
Here, where the helmets were buried, Strachey leaves unmistakable proof of his presence, his signet ring. It will link him to Jamestown forever.
And we know that Strachey, he was here for a very short period of time. So certainly he was present at the bearing of the armor. And it could be that it got lost during that activity.
In one of history's strangest turns, Strachey's odyssey takes on a life of its own. Strachey writes a female friend a letter about his adventures, a long letter. We're talking 25,000 words. Experts believe the letter makes its way into the hands of a certain playwright with a hunger for dramatic material.
Most people feel like Shakespeare is much older than any part of American history, but it's not true.
Most experts believe that Shakespeare bases his final masterpiece, The Tempest, on Strachey's account of being shipwrecked en route to Jamestown. About the same time Strachey leaves for England, Shakespeare's play The Tempest premieres before King James in London. One actor might as well be speaking of Jamestown when he says,
"In these dangerous and devilish disquiets, to the destruction each of the other, into what mischief and misery had we been given up?"
The Tempest is a hit, but torn by dissension and discontent, Jamestown, the settlement, is written off as much ado about nothing. The settlers abandon Jamestown, but low tide forces them to spend the night only 5 miles from the settlement. What they don't know is a mystery ship is heading for Jamestown. The last act of the drama will have a surprise plot twist that might even make Shakespeare jealous. In the afternoon, the tide turns, and the settlers leaving Jamestown find that the tide has turned in their own fortunes as well.
We discovered a longboat making towards us from Point Comfort. To our no little joys, we had intelligence of the Honorable Lord de Loire arriving before the fort.
It's an 11th hour rescue, so unlikely. If it weren't true, nobody would believe it.
We're told to turn around, come back to the town, and at that, I mean, that is an absolute turning point, a moment in time that made sure that Jamestown would be the first permanent English settlement.
This honorable lord met them with 3 ships exceedingly well furnished with all necessaries fitting, who again returned them to Jamestown.
Even more valuable than the food and reinforcements,
William Strachey,
the ships bring a new leader, Lord Delaware.
George Percy.
Our own people were never so weak and so far out of order as now I found them. The next day, I set the sailors to work to unlade ships and the landmen to cleanse the town.
Delaware has his men take out the trash. For today's archaeologists, it's pay dirt.
It seems to be about that time period that we find all of this stuff being thrown out in vast quantities. It's not just the daily tossing out of garbage from a household use. It really is a massive cleanup sort of situation.
For the first time since John Smith left, Jamestown has a take-charge leader in Lord Delaware. No wonder there's a state named after him.
Delaware and John Smith had a number of things in common as personalities. They both had a lot of real grit. But Delaware had one major advantage over Smith. He was aristocracy.
Delaware is a relative of Queen Elizabeth. It gives him the clout to keep the feuding settlers in line. And in a time of drought, he brings with him a royal lucky streak.
If we examine the tree closely, when Lord Delaware arrived, we can see that conditions improved, and that's illustrated by a widening of the rings from greater rainfall.
The rainfall nurtures a cash crop that assures Jamestown's survival, one of the most harmful and addictive substances used by man.
Tobacco was for married men only, and therefore tobacco was a guy thing.
The Indians smoke it for religious purposes, but when the English take a toke, they're hooked.
In fact, it'll take the roof off your mouth if you try to smoke it, so you smoke only a little at a time.
Tobacco has fascinated Europeans since Columbus. By the early 1600s, it's such a hot commodity, there are 7,000 stores selling tobacco in London alone.
In fact, King James came out against it. He said, well, this is a pretty wicked habit, and it's not good for you.
The wicked habit sparks such a strong demand that tobacco fever assures the health of the settlement.
Tobacco, for very little investment and very little land, you could make a killing.
In the fertile soil, newcomer John Rolfe perfects a new strain of Virginia tobacco. Bred from a Caribbean seed, it's a smooth-tasting blend tailor-made for the English market. In 1612, Rolfe ships his first batch of tobacco back to England, and Jamestown cashes in big time.
The valuable commodity of tobacco, which every man may plant and with the least part of his labor tend and cure, will return him both clothes and other necessaries.
Tobacco becomes Jamestown's legal currency. 1 pound equals 3 English shillings, and there's nothing tobacco can't buy.
And there were many instances of men running off to live with the Indians because there was female company. And the investors decided that having women here would be a very good idea.
And for 150 pounds of best leaf tobacco, over a year's wages by one estimate, the Virginia Company will deliver your very own wife. Shipping costs included.
Maids young and uncorrupt, to make wives to the inhabitants, and by that means to make the men there more settled and less movable.
In a few years, Jamestown is a thriving settlement. Population over 1,000, a boomtown built on a puff of smoke.
And once they had a cash crop that allowed people to get rich fast, English people began pouring across the Atlantic.
Too bad that raising a tobacco crop takes so much manpower. To fill the need, greedy settlers open a Pandora's box. Thousands from Africa will be forced into bondage, all to raise an addictive weed the world would be better off without. But ironically, the very same year that the shadow of slavery falls over North America, the principles are forged which will ultimately destroy it.
This might be our first Liberty Bell. The base section, the top is missing. It would have been hand-rung, and the bell also may have been used in that moment in 1619 when the first representative legislative assembly met in the church.
July 30th, 1619. A meeting is called in Jamestown's church.
That they have a hand in governing themselves, a general assembly should be held yearly once, for the better establishment of a commonwealth here.
For their subsistence. By them should be thought.
I think it is the birth of American democracy. It's the first time that elected officials, right almost down to the grassroots, were permitted to come in and formulate their own laws.
Jamestown becomes Virginia's capital, but before American independence, its importance declines. After a short, intense life, Jamestown fades from memory, like a line from Shakespeare's Tempest. We are such stuff as dreams are made of, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. For 400 years, Jamestown slept, its settlers forgotten. They were replaced by the Pilgrims at Plymouth Rock in America's national psyche, even though the Pilgrims arrived 13 years later. Why? Maybe Jamestown says too much about what really makes the world go round.
There's no reason to be embarrassed about it. We don't need to look for noble reasons, such as the Pilgrims going to Plymouth. Our beginning settlement at Jamestown was really based on economics, which our country still is today.
The false promise of easy riches lured Jamestown's first settlers. But those who survive the ordeal find that the true promise of the new land lies inside them, the determination to survive against all odds.